será.
The body of San Francisco attorney Dexter R. Jacobson, 52, was found Saturday. He had been shot once in the head. Jacobson's murder occurred as the federal authorities started an inquiry into the bankruptcy court system in San Francisco, and following a major criminal case against a prominent bankruptcy trustee, Charles Duck. Duck, who oversaw some of the largest bankruptcies in Northern California, pleaded guilty last year to embezzling $2.5 million in bankruptcy funds. So I'm sitting in a restaurant bar in Santa Cruz, Monterey, California area, and I'm waiting for a table. And a woman comes in and sits at the bar and orders a drink, and we start talking. She explains to me that she is undergoing a very vicious bankruptcy and that her name happens to be Mrs. Terry Melcher. Well, I knew the name Terry Melcher. That was Doris Day's son. And he was also involved in the Manson murders in that he owned the home in which Sharon Tate were murdered on Cielo Drive. At that point, she told me that Terry Melcher had died long ago. They had gone through a divorce and that he was an alcoholic and he had died of his own alcoholism. And that Doris Day was her mother-in-law and that she had been estranged from her mother-in-law ever since the divorce. She claimed that she was in bankruptcy and that she had been robbed blind by the bankruptcy system, that she filed bankruptcy to protect her assets in a Chapter 11, and she owned several homes in Martha's Vineyard area that were worth at least $3 to $4 million. But during the course of her bankruptcy, the bankruptcy attorney that she hired, as well as other bankruptcy attorneys, had charged the bankruptcy court for repayment in excess of what the estate was worth. So she was now representing herself in trying to get the bankruptcy done. She kind of bemoaned the fact that she was estranged from her mother-in-law, saying that Doris Day and she had had quite a good relationship during the marriage, and that she felt bad that her son no longer had a relationship with Doris Day. At this point in time, it was about, I think, 2010. So Doris Day just barely died in 2019, which Doris Day was my favorite blonde actress when I was younger. I just loved those Doris Day and Rock Hudson movies. Lately, I did buy a recent book revisiting the whole Bugliosi version of the trial of Charles Manson, and new information has been exposed. The number one piece of information is that Bugliosi stated that Terry Melcher's home was targeted by Manson because Manson had become very angry with Terry Melcher, who was a producer of songs, and that's why the people were killed incidentally at the Cielo Drive. It was that Charles Manson still believed that Terry Melcher still lived there. Well, this new book has brought to light the fact that this is absolutely wrong. Charles Manson was friends with very high up people. He was friends with Beach Boys and stayed at the Beach Boys house quite a bit until that turned sour. He knew Terry Melcher, and Terry Melcher, even after the killings, went out to visit Charles Manson out at their ranch in the desert of California. So Terry Melcher's testimony at the Charles Manson trial, according to this author, he had told a inaccurate story to conform with what the narrative that Bugliosi wanted to put forward, that Manson was this outsider, that he had a group of cult followers that would do his bidding, etc., etc., etc. This new book kind of puts to lie this entire scenario. Charles Manson was very connected. He was protected, it appears, by many people on the outside, including his prison psychologist and his probation and parole officers who kept him out of prison for years while Manson was wandering around doing his shenanigans. Manson also studied Scientology in prison, and also he has been rumored to have been connected with the Process Church. So these killings, many have speculated, based on reasonable evidence, appear to be a ritual satanic type of killings, especially the killing of Sharon Tate's child while the child was still in the womb. using blood to do graffiti on the walls. And then, as we know, her husband, Roman Polanski, is a well-known occultist in Europe who had to flee the United States because he had been involved in a sexual assault of a 13-year-old. There's just a lot of this process church satanic connections, especially also with the Son of Sam murders in New York, and then some other murders that occurred, which may be connected also to the smiley face killings that were several young college kids were found drowned in a river near their schools. Detective Rothstein of the New York City Police, a well-respected retired detective and a mayor in Minnesota, documents all this and states that all these connections exist. And he connects it to the Process Church and their animal rescue mission that is located in Kanab, Utah. This Process Church is being protected by the powers that be. Obviously, the state of Utah is welcoming this Process Church, and I understand millions of dollars is laundered through this phony, baloney Process Church animal rescue. And in fact, I've had several of my friends promote this rescue, this dog rescue, on their own Facebook sites without knowing that this is connected to a very satanic, ritualistic, sacrificial blood cult. As you recall, the Process Church had very fascist Nazi overtones. They were seen around LA with Nazi uniforms with their German shepherds, and they were rumored to have been sacrificing German shepherds, and they graduated into the Son of Sam ritual killings. How does this relate to my running into Terry Melcher's ex-wife, who was going through a bankruptcy, who had her multi-million-dollar fortune stolen by the trustee? Well, I'm going to tell you. After leaving the restaurant, I decided to look up the bankruptcy case of Ms. Melcher on the internet because we had had such an interesting conversation, and I wanted to really see if what she was telling me was true. So as you can see here is Ms. Melcher, Jacqueline C. Melcher, in the United States Appellate Panel, Ninth Circuit, and it's against John Richardson, Chapter Trustee, versus Jacqueline Melcher. This is her bankruptcy. The documents revealed to me that she had indeed had all of her property stolen. She probably had $3 to $6 million in property, several properties in Martha Vineyard, but by the time she finished, the trustee in the bankruptcy had liquidated all her property for pennies on the dollar.
So how can anyone expect to get any money back after they file bankruptcy? Well, let me tell you how that works. A person may own a home worth $1 million, but owe a creditor worth only $500,000, but they are injured and cannot work. Therefore, they file bankruptcy, and in the bankruptcy, the trustee is supposed to liquidate the property and pay off the creditors. For example, say you have one creditor who you owe $500,000. The trustee is supposed to liquidate or sell your home worth $1 million for $1 million, pay the creditor $500,000, and then give the debtor, which is you, $500,000 back, or the excess of this estate over the amount that is owed the creditors. Well, what happens in these bankruptcies is that you file a bankruptcy on $1 million home to pay $500,000 worth of creditors, but the bankruptcy court and the trustee and the judge see that $1 million, and what they do is they say, oh, we're going to sell this $1 million home. Well, we can only liquidate it for $200,000 and give the creditor half of what the creditor is owed and nothing back to the debtor. And then once they have sold the $1 million home for $200,000 to one of their friends and family that owns a real estate company, then they resell it, their friend and family resell it for $1 million, and the bankruptcy trustee, the judge, and their friend and family divide up the $1 million. This is called a bankruptcy fraud ring. The other way in which the bankruptcy court will exploit bankruptcy debtors is simply to run up attorney fees in excess of what the property in the estate is worth. So, for example, in Ms. Melcher's home, her property was worth, let's say, $4 million. By the time she was done, all the attorneys involved in her bankruptcy case had billed in excess of $4 to $5 million. They had basically just paid themselves money out of her property that should have been returned to her after the debtors had been paid off, and there was plenty of excess value in those homes to return plenty of money to Miss Melcher, which she had depended on. But the bankruptcy trustee, which in this case was the Santa Rosa bankruptcy trustees and the judge in Santa Rosa, squandered and used for their own greed.
Then, as the rackets go in these, they're called bankruptcy fraud schemes, is that the trustee then turns around and has friends and family buy the property for pennies on the dollar, and then they sell it for fair market value. So you can buy $1 million property out of this bankruptcy for a couple $100,000, and then the next day sell it to another corporation owned by the trustee and the bankruptcy judge, who take the form of a real estate company, and then sell it for another $2-3 million, and you've made a cool $1 million. This has been the scheme around Northern California for going on 30 years, because in 1990 there was an attorney that ended up dead after he was scheduled to whistleblow to the U.S. attorney and the FBI the next day. He ends up with a bullet in his head. And why was this shocking to me and extremely fascinating? Well, the trustee that he was going to whistleblow on,
and is alleged by several major debtors in bankruptcy as being involved in these bankruptcy fraud schemes, was the bankruptcy trustee I personally was dealing with,
who was making my life a complete miserable sham. Stop judicial corruption in our bankruptcy courts. Judicial corruption in our bankruptcy courts is economic terrorism perpetuated against mom and pop creditors. Organized crime isn't always conspicuous. Sometimes it comes masquerading in the garments of the righteous. A culture of judicial arrogance and corruption. Attorney General John Ashcroft's remarks to The Hague Global Forum on Corruption. Bankruptcy court corruption is not just a matter of bankruptcy trustees in collusion with corrupt bankruptcy judges. The corruption is supported and justice hindered by high-ranking judicial officials in the United States trustee program. The corruption has advanced to punishing any and all who mention the criminal acts of the trustees and the organized crime operating through the United States bankruptcy courts. As though greed is not enough, the trustees, in collusion with the others, intentionally go forth to destroy lives. Exemptions provided by law are denied debtors. Cases are intentionally and unreasonably kept open for years. Parties in cases are sanctioned to discourage them from pursuing justice. Contempt of the court powers are misused to coerce litigants into agreeing with the extortion demands. This does not ensure integrity and restore public confidence. Our courts should not be collection agencies for crooks. The American public, victimized and held hostage by the bankruptcy court corruptions, have nowhere to turn.
And now in 2014, when I looked up the bankruptcy of Miss Jacqueline Carlin Melcher, I discovered that the bankruptcy trustee in Santa Rosa that I had personally pissed off was the identical bankruptcy trustee that was implicated in the murders of 2 attorneys in 1990. Boy, this is a small, murderous world.
And the judge that was implicated is still the judge in the Northern California jurisdiction. Even though 2 attorneys have ended up dead, many people have lost their fortune, nothing has happened, and they continue to steal today.
California Bankruptcy Court, suspicious deaths. Dexter Jacobson, August 14th, 1990, found dead prior to the scheduled hearing with the FBI in regards to a rampant Chapter 11 judicial corruption and irregularities in the bankruptcy court system in San Francisco. 2. Gary Ray Pinnell, found dead February 11th, 1991, just before he was to present Chapter 11 corruption to the FBI, also known as Gary Pummel. Possible Texas connection between San Francisco and Texas. Harry versus Martin alleged that there were murders in Texas connected with the California bankruptcy court system, but provided no details. So as I sat at my desk, pondering my future, would it hold death? Because was angry with me, Santa Rosa trustee who was implicated already, or would I escape with my life? I only coincidentally discovered the murderous nature of the bankruptcy trustee by falling into the murderous history of Terry Melcher, Charles Manson, Sharon Tate, the Process Church out of Kanab, Utah, that sacrifices German shepherds and perhaps children, son of Sam Killer, smiley face killers. I'm just wondering how many murders would be implicated in my just happening to have a drink with Miss Jacqueline Carlin Melcher one night in a bar in Monterey, California. And how did I piss off this murderous bankruptcy trustee? By accidentally sending him a computer file that was too large for him to download. Yes, I still have the email he sent me screaming at me, demanding why he should be bothered with downloading the large file I accidentally sent him through his email. After which, he was making a court order that I appear in front of him to explain myself. Well, I did not want to travel from Fresno to Santa Rosa, and to tell you the truth, even though he had a murderous history, I was going to be damned if I complied with such a little putz of a terrible man. And unfortunately, I also had an excuse of a very personal murder that had occurred in my law practice. I had been working for a law firm out of Fresno, and our office manager that week had been murdered by her estranged husband, and I was attending the funeral, which I finally filed with the bankruptcy court, relented after I embarrassed him in front of the judge by filing the motion for a protective order. So went my brush with the murderous nature of the Northern California bankruptcy.
Que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. Que sera, sera.